video. Today I'm going to be talking about a novel that I was recommended by a friend to read. It's called The Nightingale by Kristin or Christine Hannah. Now this has easily become an epic favorite of mine, along with the likes of The Book Thief and all those timeless historical novels that I just simply adore. Now, I did realize that I should have read this book that came out around 2015 before the Book of Lost Names, which came out in 2020 and which I did a review of a couple of months back, and which definitely borrows a lot from this one. The similarities made me really wonder about how one really has to be open to the idea of stealing in the creative sense if one wants to find their inner writer and truly embrace that. Now, having said that, I want to just take a minute to pay respect to Kristin Hannah as a writer. Her penmanship is just so exquisitely immaculate. It makes me understand why I love reading so much. She uses the right words at the right time, and she's extremely skilled at conjuring up scenes that really feel 5D in its beautiful yet at sometimes like harsh clarity. The reader will truly feel transported to and absorbed by a world that is summoned by her words, where the stark reality of survival during a world war is brought to light. Now, the story starts in the first person in present-day America, that is in the 90s, told by an elderly mother who has a terminal illness. After that, it starts to go into flashback mode, told in the third person of two characters' points of view. Now, the novel tells the tale of two sisters in France during World War II, and in particular during the Nazi occupation. The two sisters are Vian, the older one, and Isabel, the younger. Both of them experience hardship at a fairly young age when their mother passes away and their father returns from the First World War, a distant and complete stranger who ends up pushing his daughters away. Vian, the elder sister, she marries early to her high school sweetheart, Antoine, while Isabel, who is a bit of a rebel, but really just a misunderstood child searching for love, she keeps getting kicked out of multiple boarding schools, never really finding a place for her to fit in. Now, Vian suffers from two miscarriages, but then has a daughter, eventually, Sophie. Vian teaches at a school with her best friend, Rachel de Champlain, and she's happily married with Antoine, and they live in their quaint countryside town called Carivaux. Now, this is pretty much where the story begins. Antoine gets enlisted to fight for France and heads off in such a really vividly described scene of him walking away from the loves of his life, that is Vian and Sophie. Isabel, on the other hand, determines to head to Paris to live with her father, who still ends up rejecting her after all these years and sending her off to live with her sister and niece in Carivaux, which is when we start to see the relationship dynamics and how strained the relationship is. So as time progresses and we are propelled into the heart of occupied France, several homes become, by force, temporary accommodations for certain German officers of the military administration. Vian's home is selected as one of these since it's near one of the airfields, and thus Vian, Sophie, and Isabel have to learn how to coexist with a Nazi soldier under their own roof. Now, what I liked about the characterization of this particular Nazi soldier, Captain Beck, was that he wasn't strictly portrayed as heartless and cruel as one would expect. You know, it wasn't just black and white, not at first anyway. In fact, he's such a gentleman with polite manners, and Kristin, the writer, goes as far as to show such human sides of him that sends Vian off on a spiral dilemma of whether or not to trust him. There is a give and take in their relationship, however, and an example of that is when Captain Beck asks her to share a list of names of all the Jews she knows, because, you know, he's instructed to do so by his, you know, officer or whatever. But once she shares this list and then she is racked with guilt and worry about her complicit act, he does warn her that Rachel is going to be deported, so that Vian has enough time to hide Rachel and her children inside her barn. And yet, in the end, like towards the end, due to uncertainty about what's going on and the bad timing, Rachel does eventually get caught trying to escape to the free zone, while her daughter Sarah gets shot at almost point blank range by a soldier. Vian then vows to take care of Ari, Rachel's newborn baby. Eventually, Isabel, who had always yearned to do something grand towards fighting back, crosses paths with a group of maquisards, who are basically the underground network of the French resistance. She joins them and begins distributing anti-Nazi flyers, obviously risking her safety to do so. As her tasks become more and more dangerous, she leaves her sister and goes to Paris to see her father and to carry out a mission at the same time. Now, after this point, her lifestyle becomes a life risk, really, day in and day out, forcing her to not stay in one place for a long time to avoid getting caught by the Gestapo, the Nazi police. Now, she even chooses to embark on long and difficult treks across the Pyrenees Mountains to Spain to take downed British and American pilots to the British consulate, thus earning her title of the Nightingale, even though that's also the meaning of her surname, Isabel Rossignol, Nightingale in French. Vian, on the other hand, has her loyalty and patience tested in a completely different way, as she is consistently faced with situations where she's really torn between being meek, obeying the will of the enemy, and doing the least she can in her power to stand up for or protect others. She gets fired from her teaching job because she questions an officer's actions. Now, through Vian, we get familiar with the brutal reality of the war and how the mere act of surviving becomes an extremely difficult feat. They all have to queue up for scraps of food while the Nazis feast on the best meats and wines that the country has to offer, leaving barely anything for the French citizens. Through Vian, we also experience motherhood in war, and particularly how a mother would practically do anything at all to keep her children safe, whether that's, starving so that her child could eat, or even getting raped while, suffering silently, or even risking her own life by hiding, a Jewish child in her own home. But going back to Isabel, Isabel's just such a larger than life character. Everything she does is just big, grand, and out there. And I'm actually glad that, she finally finds a purpose that she diligently dedicates herself to, enduring and overcoming insurmountable obstacles along the way. She does eventually get caught, obviously, towards the end, and she goes through unspeakable torture where all sense of time and space is completely wiped out. But the ultimate act that really gets us is when her father gets wind of her capture and chooses to sacrifice himself, turning himself in as the Nightingale that the Germans are looking for. You know, even seeing her father get executed before her eyes, she endured somehow, and you know, and then after that she gets sent away to a concentration camp. It's just honestly mind-blowing how strong her spirit is, and Vian's too, of course. In fact, my favorite takeaway is the lesson that Isabel shares with Vian in the end, and that's something along the lines of they can break your body, but they can't break your soul, which is very like reminiscent of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Honestly, this book was worth every page and every tear you will shed, and shed you will, I promise. There were just so many heart-wrenching scenes that I found myself literally having to take a breather. You know, when I found myself, you know, reading for so long, I couldn't bear it. I do hear there is a movie adaptation of this novel being worked on, but again, my idea of the cast would probably be a bit different. If it were up to me, I would probably cast Amy Adams to play the role of Vien, and Emma Stone to play the rebellious and revolutionary Isabel. All in all, an almost perfect masterpiece of a book. I highly recommend it. I'd rate the novel a 5 out of 5 stars. Do let me know what you think about the book down in the comments. And until next time, au revoir!